Today we're going to be working on the 8N Ford. So I was out the other day moving some stuff around and went to steer the thing, and the steering wheel started spinning, but the wheels are not turning. And the steering wheel is turning up and out, which to me says that the bearings inside the steering box that hold the worm gear on the top to bottom are damaged. So I did manage to get it up into the garage here. I don't have room in the shop right now, so we're going to be working on this in the garage. In order to take that steering box off that's right there, we are going to have to pull the entire hood and steering wheel and pretty much all the dash area off of the tractor in order to get that steering box off of there. I do not have a new one yet. I'm determining whether I'm going to try to rebuild this one or try to find a used one, or they do sell them new. They're pretty expensive. I'm weighing my options right now. I'm going to try to figure out what to do. So the first thing you want to do with any type of repair at all is I want to go in and I want to unhook the battery terminals. Starting with negative first, I'm going to take these battery terminals off. Hopefully. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to take these bolts loose right here, the ones that go around the dash, between the dash and the hood. And I'm going to have to get a wrench for the inside as well. Anytime you guys are working on any projects out in the shop, out in the garage, you always want to make sure when you take your hardware apart, I like to put the nut back onto the bolt and put all the bolts for certain things together. So if you've got bolts specifically for the dash surround right here, make sure you take those bolts and put them in the same place. If you're forgetful or the project ends up taking longer than you thought it was going to take, you're going to want those bolts labeled and possibly put in Ziploc bags. I keep Ziploc bags out in the shop specifically just for projects to put stuff in. And then when I'm done, I pull the bolts back out of them. I hang on to the Ziploc bags and reuse them. But pretty much what you want to do is keep all the bolts together for the same area and label them, because if you don't, what's going to happen is you may take this apart and you come back to put it together and it's 6 months later and you forget where those went. And if you just have a bag that says front end bolts, now on a tractor it's not that big of a deal, but when you start taking apart a car and it says front end bolts, you're not going to remember where those bolts go. So it's always a good idea to take those bolts and put them all together in the same spot. Okay, so a couple things here that are easy to take apart on the dash. Choke knob right here, that comes out real easy. All you have to do is unthread the knob from the rod. It just screws right off of there. That's an easy one. The other thing I'm going to have to do here is the tachometer. If you have a working tachometer with a cable on it, there is a spot right on the bottom of the tachometer for a cable. I wanted to get a light under here so you can see. This is the tachometer right here. And on the back side of the tachometer, there's a little nut right here. And it should just be hand tight. Sometimes these get real snug and you have to use a wrench for them. But that's simply, you just undo that. And you can see there's a cable in there. And it just slides out of the gauge. Now this line actually runs back behind your air filter, and it runs down all the way to the front down here to the governor, and it comes off the back of that. So you can technically unhook it back here, but then you've got all that cable to deal with. One of the other things we're going to have to do here is there's an oil pressure line that runs through here, and that is this line right here. And it goes down to this connection where you get oil pressure off the motor. And this actually runs up and under and behind the air filter. And I'll show you up above where it goes. So that line runs up here and comes across and goes to the back of your oil pressure gauge. Now there is a fitting down in here, right there, if it'll focus, that you can see. I don't know if it'll focus on it or not, but there's a fitting right there that you're actually going to have to take a wrench and remove that fitting. Now do not try to start the tractor or turn it on once you've taken that off, because that gets full oil pressure to it to run this oil pressure gauge. So if you try to fire it up with that thing unhooked, it's going to be spewing oil out everywhere. So one of the other things we're going to have to take off is we're going to have to disconnect the air filter from the opening where the air goes into it. And there's a couple ways to do that. Oh, if it'll focus. There's a couple ways to do that. You can disconnect this pipe right here from it, or you can actually take this wing nut off and unbolt it from there and take the hood off and leave that on the tractor. Now, because we are getting down in here and we're going to be unbolting the steering box, which is right here, I have a feeling that this thing's going to be kind of in our way of getting that steering box off. So I think I'm going to take the entire filter out of here and just unhook it from the pipe up here. And this pipe for the filter just runs down and goes down here and goes straight to the carburetor. So there are quite a few things we're going to have to unhook on this. There is a couple different wires that run across there, and I'll show you on the other side what those look like. Now on this side, this is our battery ground right here, and that goes to this plate that runs up behind and above the steering box. This is the steering box right here that's coming out of there. So on this side, we have a red wire that's running down to your starter button, and that comes in right here. And I know a couple of you guys asked questions about that when I did the starter button, how to hook that up. And it's basically just one wire that runs up into your starter. The other part that we have up here, and mine is an absolute mess, which a lot of tractors that have been worked on in the past are, your key switch to turn this on and off is up in here. And that is connected to your dash. So that may have to be removed and taken out of there. And there is some other wiring up in here. This is the wiring harness that runs down to the starter and the starter solenoid. And also it runs forward for your alternator or generator. And I believe that somewhere up in here, there's wiring that runs forward to run to your headlights, which are on the front of the tractor. So there's not a lot of wiring to these tractors, but we're going to be getting into it right here because we got to take this dash area apart. Another handy tool that you might want to pick up is one of these magnetic bowls. This one's a Craftsman one. You can buy these things just about anywhere, but they're magnetic, and you can put your bolts in there. Well, they're not gonna fall out if you don't wiggle it too much, but I don't know where that bolt went. Great. Well, there it is. All right. Yeah. They somewhat stick in there as long as they're a steel bolt. But there's a couple other bolts down here I want to show you that we're going to take off, because this is our steering box. We're going to have to take this bolt, and then up in here there's a bolt. We're going to have to pull that one, because all this structure right here has to come off of that steering box in order to get it up. And the steering box is actually bolted down here, and there's a bolt behind that steering arm that we're going to have to take there. We are going to have to remove the nut from the back of here in order to take these steering arms off. These are what actually run the steering. They run all the way forward to actually turn the wheels. So we're going to have to take those bars off of there in order to remove the steering box. And then up above, if you have the auxiliary toolbox that's inside here, some tractors have it, some don't. Inside that toolbox, there's a screw in here, and I believe I'm going to have to remove some stuff. There's a couple of bolts down at the bottom, and we're going to have to pull that entire toolbox up and out of there as well, because it is connected to the bracing that is on the front of the steering box, which is that blue piece right here that you're seeing. So we're going to be pulling all that apart in order to get that steering box out of there. So I just wanted to show you here, there were only two things holding my toolbox in, the one screw that was there and that one bolt down in the corner down there. With the toolbox out of the way, this is what the back of the dash looks like. That's your oil pressure gauge. And your choke rod is below that. And then all of your wiring is over here. This right here is the amp meter gauge. That is your, I believe that's what, your headlights. And then that is just a junction block right there for the wiring. And then your, down underneath here is where your wiring runs back to the other parts of the tractor. And down there is your ignition switch where your key goes into. So we're going to have to disconnect some of that stuff. I would suggest any wires that you take off, get your camera, take a picture of the wires, label those wires. Just take a piece of masking tape or something and put on there. Label what they are so you know what they are, so you can put them back on. If anybody's done any work to your tractor, like has been done to mine, a lot of these wires are the same color. I think originally they were different colors, but if they're the same color like that, you really, really need to label that stuff. And we are back to the other side of the tractor here. We've got a bolt that's back in here that we're going to have to remove. And I'm going to take this bolt off. And I believe there's another bolt, yep, right there, that we're going to remove those two so I can take my air filter down and out of the way. Now be careful with your air filter because these are an oil bath filter. And on the bottom of these filters, there's actually oil that's supposed to be that deep in the bottom of this, where the air comes in right here, it goes down through, the oil catches all the dirt and everything before the air goes into the engine. So if you take this off and you tip it sideways, you could have a mess of oil coming out everywhere. Please be careful with that. Okay, now that I've got the air filter out of the way, I'm going to show you guys the throttle is this stick right here. You guys probably, if you have one of these tractors, you probably already know that. But the throttle is that stick right there. Now it actually runs down through inside this piece, and it comes through right here. That's that same rod right there. And it has a spring on the bottom of it, and it also connects over here to this rod, and this rod runs forward to your governor. It runs all the way under the intake there and forward to here. And that's what gives your, when you throttle up the tractor, it pulls back on that and basically allows this other rod through the governor to move to give your carburetor, to open it up to give it more gas. So that needs to be disconnected. Now these things are a little weird. Basically it's spring loaded. You can see it moves like this. Now if there's corrosion and stuff on it, it may be a little hard to move, but basically that pulls forward and there's a ball socket in there. And you can see how that works. And that clip just springs back and keeps it on there. So at this point, I'm just removing that to get it out of the way. So there's your throttle there. There's also a spring, and I don't even know if that spring's in the right spot, but I think so. That spring runs across there, and I think I'm going to try to pull this whole assembly up and off of the top all in one piece. So I think I may actually go back against what I said. I may take the entire battery box loose from the tractor to try to take the whole thing out of there, because it might be easier to access without, because this is actually the two bolts that hold this rod in place and stuff like that. And I'm wondering if that would come off of there all as one assembly. It looks like it might. So I think I might try to do that and see if that comes apart that way. So I have decided to pull the entire battery box out. So in order to do that, there are two bolts down underneath where the battery goes. There's one here and one right there. And these are actually bolts that run into the back of the engine block. So you're going to have to take those two out to get that battery box out, but that'll take that entire assembly out of there. So I got those two bolts out. There was still one more bolt underneath here that I forgot, but that battery box is loose now and can come right out of there. and I'm going to go around to the other side to pull it out. But so that battery box can come out, and then once that's out of the way, I should be able to get to the back of the, it's a little hard to see down there, the back of the steering box is down at the bottom there too, and hopefully we can start getting this hood and dash off. Another important part here, this dash piece right here is going to have to slide up and over your steering column, and there's a grease zerk right here. I don't know if I can get that to focus. Yeah, there's a grease zerk right there. Not every tractor has this. Some of them do, some of them don't, but you're going to have to take that grease zerk out of there in order for that to slide up over. You're also going to have to pull this nut off of here, and you're going to have to get this steering wheel off of there. Some of these can be a pain in the butt to get off of there because they'll actually stick to the spline that's in there. You can possibly use a gear puller on this to try to pop that off of there. I've had my steering wheel off of there, so hopefully mine comes off easily. That can be a real pain to try to get the steering wheels off of these things sometimes. So now that I said that, mine was a pain to get off of there. So once you get the nut off of there and get the steering wheel actually loose on here, I've got it loosened already. You can pull that off, and you can see there's a spline. I don't know if there's a spline on there for that steering wheel to sit down on. And then underneath it, there is a spring as well. There's a dust seal on here too. You may want to pull all that off of there, but that's what it looks like with the wheel off of it. And you do have to get that off and get that grease zerk out of there in order to pull the dash up off of that column. Okay, I'm back over to this side. A couple other things you're going to need to do if you're going to pull this entire hood off of here. This is where your fuel comes out. You're going to need to turn this knob and turn your fuel off and make sure that that is completely off. And then you're going to need to unhook your fuel line that goes from the bowl down to your carburetor, because the fuel tank is right here. It is actually attached to the hood. I don't have much fuel in the tank right now, so it should make it a little easier to lift off of there. Some of the other things you need to look out for is wiring. Some of this wiring that's up in here, the wiring that runs across to the headlight on the other side, is just laying on the block here. You're going to have to make sure that that is loose and disconnected before you try to pull the hood off, because the headlights are attached to that. One of the other things here too, down at the bottom, there are two bolts, one here and one on the other side, that bolt the bottom of the grill down into the core support on the radiator. Those have to come loose. And then up on top, you're going to have to pull your radiator cap off of there, because the radiator is going to stay. The hood is going to come up over that radiator. So we're going to have to pull that off. I like to shove just a little bit of paper towel or a rag in there, so when you're taking it off of there, you don't get crud falling down into your radiator. Okay, so now that I've got everything loose and unhooked, the best thing to do is get somebody to help you to grab a hold of the front end and pick up the back end, and you should be able to just lift the entire hood off of there. I like to have a 5-gallon bucket flipped upside down ready to go, so you can set the front of the hood down on the floor, turn the bucket over, and set the back of it on there so it's not tipped back and you're losing fuel or anything like that. Depending on how much fuel's in your tank, you're probably going to want a hand lifting this off of here. I don't have any help today, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit on the tractor like I would normally sit on it, and I'm going to lean forward here and just kind of gently pull this up off of there. Oops. Just to get it loose from there. So that the hood is loose, it's going to come up in the back here. I just need to shift the front forward now. Okay, I've got the front end up. So now I'm going to attempt to lift. Ouch, I smashed my finger. Okay, see if I can lift it, shift it. There we go. All right. That will probably do. Okay. So now I've got this up and out of here enough to where I've pretty much got the hood up away from the dash area. So now we can start pulling apart this dash area and getting that wiring disconnected. And I'm hoping maybe I can leave some of this on there and just pull the dash off of there and let the dash sit somewhere down here while I remove that steering box. I'm going to attempt to, all my stuff's disconnected here, attempt to start pulling this up. I got to make sure that choke goes down through there. Oops, I still got a spring hooked up down here. Leave that spring lay right like that. Okay, that's disconnected. Okay, so in the middle of screwing around with it, I moved this back and forth and got this to turn so it actually slid up off of there. So at this point, I've got the wiring loose enough that I should be able to pull that entire dash piece off. I do have some wiring connected to it here that I don't want to pull. Anyhow, there's the steering box. We've got pretty much everything off. There's a few wires left there. This is the choke rod, but we still need to disconnect the two steering arms on it. And then I'm going to come in with a blowgun, and there's all kinds of dust and dirt. When we take this box off of here, there's actually an opening underneath that goes down into the transmission and gearbox. And we don't want any of this crud that's around here getting down in there. The steering box is cast iron, so it's heavy. When I lift that off, I don't want to be knocking or jarring any of the dust and dirt that's collected down into there. So we'll take a blowgun and we're going to blow all this off really, really well before we go ahead and pull that box off of there. Okay, so I'm going to turn on the light here. So the nut that's back in behind here, we'll have to take that off and pop that ball joint off. And there's one just like it on the other side. Do not mess with the adjusters. Those don't have to be changed. You can just pull those off of there. And then I'm going to take the blowgun, blow this off. And then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts. And that steering box is off of there. Okay, it's unbolted, ready to come out. Another thing that I noticed here, look at how much play is in that. There's a lot of play in there. And this thing, it does turn the things, but boy, that bearing's shot. So the bearings that are up in here are destroyed. So anyhow, that's ready to come out of there. Basically, it just lifts off of there. And there's your steering box. It is fairly heavy. Be careful pulling it out of there. But while it's out, let me see if I can bring you up here. While it's out, we can take a look down in here. Oh, let's turn on a light. And you can actually see there's your clutch and your throwout bearing. And there's where the input goes into the actual transmission. And you can take a look at that. Now, I have recently done a clutch in here, so all this stuff should be real nice shape. I'm going to take a little flashlight and take a good look down in there, make sure there's nothing weird going on in there. I'm also going to take a rag and I'm going to cover that hole so nothing crawls in there. I don't drop any dirt in there or anything like that. And steering box is ready to go. It needs to get either rebuilt or I need to find another one.